I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
The order was only a few pages long, but the consequences were devastating. Behind the closed doors of the royal household, Prince William authorized a financial restructuring that ended Queen Camilla's final independent connection to sovereign grant funding. There was no ceremonial warning, no gentle transition, and no opportunity for negotiation. When the Queen was informed, her expression changed instantly. Because this was not simply an accounting decision. It was the moment the future king declared that her power had an expiration date. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla sat still as a senior financial officer entered her private sitting room and placed the sealed directive before her. The sovereign grant, the public funding used to support official royal duties, had paid for her staff, travel, correspondence, ceremonial preparation, and the machinery of her public role. Now that access was being removed. Every major expense connected to the Queen would pass through the Prince of Wales's transition office, the team preparing William to manage the monarchy's next reign. She read the first page once, then again. Her fingers tightened around the arm of the chair as the meaning settled in. Camilla could still carry out engagements, support charities, and stand beside Charles, but she could no longer authorize significant spending without William's approval. The title remained. The independence did not. Finally, she lifted her eyes and asked the question hanging over the entire room. Has the king agreed to this? The officer hesitated. That silence wounded more deeply than any explanation could have done. Camilla had been told only that routine financial adjustments were underway. Her household had never been warned that the review would erase her last separately controlled funding channel. Someone had chosen not merely to exclude her from the decision, but to ensure she discovered it only after the order had become difficult to reverse. William had already set down the pen at another royal residence. An aide gathered the authorization while the prince remained silent, aware that the decision would be seen as a direct challenge to his stepmother. The restructuring had been prepared weeks earlier, then deliberately held until Charles's advisors accepted that the future king had assumed wider responsibility for long-term royal planning. William had waited for authority, not permission. Camilla rose slowly and ordered the room cleared. She did not ask to speak with William. She demanded to see Charles alone. As the door closed, one terrifying possibility began to consume her. The prince may have signed the order, but the king may have allowed him to do it. For years, the three of them had maintained an uneasy balance. Charles offered loyalty to his wife, William protected the future of the crown, and Camilla built a place for herself inside an institution that had once rejected her. But the funding order shattered that arrangement in a single morning. Suddenly, every private promise was being measured against constitutional duty. And when love, legacy, and succession entered the same room, someone was always going to leave wounded. Camilla saw her official household as more than an office. It was proof that the monarchy had finally accepted her place beside Charles. The staff, travel arrangements, ceremonial support, and public work all showed that she was not merely the king's wife. She was part of the working crown. To lose independent funding now felt like watching years of struggle being pulled apart, while the title remained untouched. William viewed the same structure very differently. He believed the monarchy he would inherit had to be smaller, clearer, and protected from rival centers of authority. Succession, the formal passing of the crown from one sovereign to the next, was no longer a distant idea to him. It shaped every choice. Financial control was not simply about money. It was about ensuring that no separate household could limit his authority when his reign began. Charles sat alone with the directive on his desk and removed his glasses slowly. William's signature stood at the bottom of the page, firm and final. The king understood the logic behind the decision. He also knew Camilla would see it as betrayal. For years, he had tried to protect his wife from the institution's coldest judgments. Now his own son had acted in the name of that same institution. Camilla entered without waiting to be announced. She closed the door, crossed the room, and placed the directive in front of Charles. Her voice stayed controlled, but the hurt beneath it was impossible to hide. She asked whether he still saw her as a partner, or only as a responsibility William was preparing to manage. Charles did not answer quickly. Then the truth came. He admitted that he had authorized William to review future royal expenditure, believing the prince would recommend gradual reform. He had never expected him to move so directly against Camilla's office. The admission changed everything. William had anticipated resistance and prepared the order so no quiet request from Charles could undo it. Any reversal would require a formal review, recorded by senior household officials, making the family conflict part of the crown's official history. Camilla expected to hear excuses about finance, efficiency, and reform. Instead, Charles named the ceremony that had turned William's concern into determination. And the moment he spoke its name, she knew this crisis had begun long before the signature. Every palace rupture has a moment that appears insignificant, until history looks back and recognizes it as the beginning. For William, that moment came during the Crown Service reception at St. James's Palace. Nothing collapsed publicly. No argument erupted before the guests. Yet behind one closed door, Camilla issued an instruction that crossed an invisible line. The prince heard what had happened before midnight. By the following morning, he had ordered a complete examination of her household, and the path to the devastating funding cut had begun. Camilla's office had been growing stronger for months. Her advisors were shaping engagements, influencing staffing choices, arranging travel, and controlling access to Charles during periods when the king reduced his public duties. The Crown Service reception, a formal palace gathering used to recognize royal work and service, should have reinforced unity. Instead, it exposed how deeply divided the household had become. William had already warned that long-term commitments must be coordinated with his transition team, the group preparing the monarchy for the next reign. The prince believed this was necessary because contracts, salaries, and ceremonial plans, approved now, could continue long after he became sovereign. Camilla heard something very different. To the Queen, every request from William sounded like an attempt to weaken her, while Charles still wore the crown. The decisive moment came away from the reception itself. Camilla called the royal finance director into a private room and instructed him to approve a permanent expansion of her household. She also ordered him to reserve funding for future projects without consulting William's office. The director remained near the doorway, clearly unsettled, and reminded her that the prince had already placed a freeze on new commitments. Camilla's expression hardened. She answered with 6 words that would change everything. William is not yet sovereign. The finance director understood the danger immediately. Obeying her could place him against the future king. Refusing her could appear to challenge the current queen. He left without giving a clear promise. William received the full account later that evening, during a private, documented briefing. The director repeated Camilla's words exactly and described the funding instruction she had issued. The future king listened without interruption. Then he requested every expenditure authorized by her office during the previous 18 months. The review uncovered more than expansion plans. Camilla's household controlled a protected reserve, intended to cover future ceremonial, staffing, and advisory costs beyond Charles's active reign. One internal clause appeared to preserve part of that financial structure even after the crown passed to William. To him, that was not protection. It was a rival authority waiting inside his reign. William stopped using intermediaries. He requested a private meeting with Camilla and made one condition unmistakably clear: Charles would not be present. The Queen had once declared that William was not yet sovereign. Now the prince was preparing to show her how much power he already possessed. There were no advisors in the room, no secretaries taking notes, and no monarch seated between them. William stood beside the fireplace while Camilla entered, carrying the order that had stripped away her financial independence. Neither offered a greeting. For years, their deepest disagreements had been concealed beneath protocol. Now the protection of ceremony was gone. What followed was not merely a dispute between a prince and a queen. It was a battle over who truly controlled the monarchy's future. William had chosen a private library instead of an official council room. A council room was used for formal royal business, where decisions were recorded and supported by senior officials. The library offered no such protection. This was personal. Camilla arrived with the funding directive covered in handwritten objections, determined to stop the restructuring before it reached her staff and dismantled the household she had spent years building. Camilla placed the document heavily on the table. "You have gone too far," she said. The Queen expected resistance, perhaps even anger, but William did not raise his voice. The prince answered that the permanent commitments approved by her office had left him no responsible alternative. He said the monarchy could not enter a future reign burdened by promises he had never accepted and accounts he could not fully control. Camilla's anger broke through. She accused William of waiting until Charles became vulnerable before moving against her. The Queen said he had hidden ambition behind the language of reform and treated her loyalty as if it were a threat. William's expression tightened. He replied that he had spent years protecting his father from conflicts she refused to acknowledge, and that silence had only allowed those conflicts to grow. William then revealed the evidence. The prince pointed to the post-reign funding clause uncovered during the documented financial review and asked why Camilla's household intended to preserve authority after Charles was no longer sovereign. A sovereign was the reigning king or queen who held final constitutional authority. To William, the clause looked like an attempt to carry one royal court into another reign. Camilla finally admitted the truth. She believed William would dismantle her official life the moment he inherited the crown. The Queen said the reserve was meant to protect loyal staff and charitable causes from sudden abandonment. She had not been building a rival court, she insisted. She had been preparing for survival. William slid the marked directive back toward her and refused to touch it again. The decision was final. He moved the chair between them aside and turned toward the door. Camilla warned that Charles would reverse everything once he heard the full account. William paused. Then he told her the king had already declined to challenge the order formally. Camilla entered believing William had acted behind his father's back. She left knowing Charles's silence may have been the most painful decision of all. William's authority did not arrive with a crown placed upon his head. It arrived through briefings, signatures, private approvals, and the growing certainty that senior officials were already looking to him for direction. The funding order exposed a truth no palace statement could soften. Power was moving before the reign had ended. Charles still occupied the throne, but the machinery surrounding it had begun turning toward his son. For Camilla, that shift was not theoretical. It had just closed around her household. Charles had gradually given William control over long-term spending, staffing reform, estate planning, and preparations for the next reign. The prince's transition office, the team preparing the monarchy for a future change of sovereign, now carried real influence. Because the funding directive affected commitments that could continue beyond the king's reign, senior officials decided that William had the authority to enforce it. The order would stand unless Charles openly challenged his son. Charles met privately with the keeper of the privy accounts, the official responsible for overseeing sensitive royal finances. The king asked whether Camilla's funding could be restored quietly, without creating a public conflict. The answer was devastating. Any intervention would require a formal record showing that the sovereign had opposed his heir over the future management of the crown. Charles returned to his desk, carrying that burden. He lifted his pen and held it above a countermand, an order that would cancel William's decision. For several seconds, the monarch did not move. He could protect his wife, but doing so would weaken his son before the next reign had even begun. Slowly, he lowered the pen without signing. Anne had already warned him this moment would come. During a documented private conversation weeks earlier, the princess urged Charles to give William clear authority over future financial arrangements. She believed divided control would create confusion, resentment, and competing loyalties when the crown changed hands. Charles had resisted her advice emotionally, but he could no longer deny its logic. Catherine had taken a quieter path. She did not help design the directive, yet she urged William to avoid humiliating Camilla and to preserve support for every charity that could prove its public value. The princess understood that reform could become cruelty if it ignored the people caught inside it. William received confirmation that the order would remain in force. He did not celebrate. In a private conversation with Catherine, the prince admitted that the decision might destroy whatever remained of his relationship with his stepmother. She reminded him that leadership could be necessary and painful at the same time. Then the consequences became real. Camilla's staff were ordered to surrender financial access, cancel planned appointments, and report to William's administrative team. The struggle that began with signatures had finally reached real people. And when the first office doors closed, Camilla saw exactly what the order had taken from her. The fallout did not arrive with trumpets or a public announcement. It came through disabled accounts, cancelled travel plans, reassigned staff, and telephone calls that ended with stunned silence. By afternoon, the household Camilla had spent years building was being dismantled one instruction at a time. She had believed the title of queen would protect her place. Instead, she watched as the structure surrounding that title disappeared and realized that dignity without authority could feel like another form of exile. William's office froze Camilla's independent expenditure codes, the internal permissions that allowed her household to approve official spending. Travel plans and event costs were placed under central review, while new contracts connected to the Queen's staff were suspended. The decision mattered because money controlled more than comfort. It determined who could work, which duties could continue, and whether her public role still carried real independence. Senior employees received private notices before noon. Some positions would move into the central royal household, the main administrative body serving the working monarchy, while others would end after a short transition. The change meant Camilla would lose not only authority, but people who had helped build her place beside Charles. Camilla entered her correspondence room and stopped. Two assistants were packing ceremonial files into archival boxes. The Queen told them to leave everything where it was, but one assistant explained that the transfer order had already taken effect. She could not reverse it with a spoken command. One long-serving secretary began to cry while apologizing for leaving. Camilla took her hand and fought to keep her own voice steady. She promised that no employee would be blamed for obeying William's directive. The Queen understood that loyalty had limits when salaries, careers, and families depended on the crown. The losses continued quietly. Several engagements linked closely to Camilla were removed from the calendar, while selected causes were reassigned to Sophie and Anne. The Queen knew both women would protect the work, yet every transfer carried the same message. The monarchy was learning to function without her household. Charles tried to soften the damage. The king offered to fund a smaller personal office from private income, money belonging to him rather than the public royal budget. Camilla refused. She understood that accepting would confirm her removal from the official financial life of the crown. Camilla waited until the last staff member had gone. She closed the door, removed her briefing folder from the desk, and sat alone in the silent room. Then William arrived without aides, paperwork, or warning. The prince had not come to reverse the order. He had come to apologize. With her household stripped away, Camilla prepared for another battle. Instead, she faced a son finally confronting the human damage of his decision. By the time William entered the darkened room, there was no institution left between them. No council, no accountants, no king, and no carefully drafted language. Camilla remained seated beside the desk that had once controlled a thriving royal household. The prince stood in the doorway and saw, Perhaps for the first time, not a rival center of power, but a woman terrified of becoming disposable. His decision had not changed. Yet what he said next transformed the meaning of everything that had happened. William dismissed the waiting equerry, the royal attendant responsible for supporting senior members of the family, and entered alone. Camilla did not rise. She did not offer tea or ask him to sit. The silence was deliberate, and the prince understood that every word now had to carry more than policy. William spoke first. He made clear that the sovereign grant restructuring would not be withdrawn. The funding system, which supported official royal duties with public money, would remain under central control. He refused to create false hope or turn the meeting into another negotiation. Then his tone changed. William told Camilla he was sorry that she had learned of the order from a financial officer instead of hearing it directly from him. The prince admitted that the decision had been delivered with unnecessary coldness. He had focused so completely on protecting the future crown that he had ignored the humiliation caused in the present. Camilla answered without anger. The queen said money had never been the deepest wound. What devastated her was discovering that William and Charles could both imagine the monarchy continuing without her, while she was still serving it. She had spent years proving she belonged, only to learn that belonging could disappear through one signature. William listened. Then he offered a compromise. The prince proposed a smaller, fully funded office dedicated to Camilla's established charities. It would be protected for her lifetime, but every expense would remain under transparent, central oversight. Camilla surprised him. She refused the lifetime guarantee. The queen requested a 5-year transition instead, after which every cause would have to survive on its own value rather than royal protection. She would not accuse William of clinging to power while demanding permanent protection for herself. William finally sat opposite her. He acknowledged that Camilla had protected Charles through years of personal strain and public pressure. The prince said that service would not be erased. She, in turn, accepted that the monarchy could not enter a new reign with competing financial authorities. The agreement healed nothing completely, but it changed the direction of the conflict. William and Camilla agreed to attend the next Crown Council reception together, a formal gathering where senior royals and advisors showed unity around major decisions. When they stepped into public view, they would not pretend the rupture had never happened. They would show that the crown had survived it and that its balance had changed. By sunrise, the financial order was no longer a palace secret. Broadcasters interrupted scheduled programs, newspaper editors tore up completed front pages, and crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace, searching for signs of crisis. Yet the public did not fully understand the meaning of the decision until William and Camilla appeared together hours later. They exchanged no warm embrace and offered no statement. Still, one brief gesture captured the truth more clearly than any headline. The future king had taken control, and the queen had accepted it. The palace could no longer remain silent. Officials confirmed that Camilla's official spending would now be managed through a centralized royal office, meaning one administrative team would approve expenses across the working monarchy. The change mattered because it removed her final independent financial authority and placed the future structure of the crown firmly under William's control. Commentators divided almost at once. Some called the move responsible modernization, arguing that one clear system would prevent waste and confusion. Others described it as the final defeat of Camilla's influence. To them, the queen had kept her title, but lost the power that gave the role real weight. The Daily Chronicle captured the national mood with a black and gold front page showing Camilla leaving a royal residence beneath the headline, "The Queen Without a Purse, William Takes Control." The words were brutal. They reduced a complex royal struggle to one humiliating image and made the transfer of power impossible to ignore. Crowds gathered near the gates of Buckingham Palace, the monarch's main official residence in London. One woman held a handwritten sign reading, "One crown, one account." Another argued loudly that Camilla had been punished after years of service. The disagreement outside reflected the conflict inside. Was this reform, or was it removal? Charles watched the coverage in silence. A broadcaster described William as the monarchy's effective decision-maker, and the king slowly lowered the volume. Anne sat nearby as he admitted, "They have seen the transition before I was ready to show it." The princess said nothing at first, but her expression told him the truth had already escaped palace control. Camilla refused to hide. Through a recorded conversation with her senior aide, the Queen insisted on attending the Crown Council reception beside William. The gathering, where senior royals and advisors demonstrated unity around major decisions, could not be allowed to become proof of a family collapse. At the entrance, Camilla paused. William extended his arm, and she rested her hand upon it for one brief moment. The gesture was formal, restrained, and unmistakable. She was no longer directing the future, but she would not sabotage it. That evening, Charles invited them both to dine privately. The country had witnessed the transfer of authority. Now the king had to decide whether its human cost had been justified. The final reckoning came without officials, legal advisors, or ceremonial witnesses. Charles sat at the head of a small dining table, with his wife on one side and his son on the other. Between them lay years of loyalty, suspicion, sacrifice, and wounds that no financial directive could explain. The king knew he could not restore the past, and William knew authority alone could not heal the family. Camilla understood something harder still. Remaining beside the crown now required surrendering her claim to shape what came after Charles. Charles had brought them together before the settlement reached the wider royal household. The new structure was now final. Camilla's independent sovereign grant allocation, the public funding once used to support her official duties, would remain permanently closed. A smaller charitable office would continue for 5 years under centralized oversight, exactly as the Queen had requested. Her work would survive, but her separate financial authority would not. Charles turned first to William. The king told his son that the decision had been necessary, yet he warned that leadership must never confuse efficiency with compassion. Power could protect the crown, but it could also wound the people serving it. William accepted the criticism without defending himself. The prince knew that being right about the future did not erase the pain created in the present. Charles then faced Camilla. He thanked his wife for standing beside him through years of public hostility and private strain. The monarch admitted that the institution had often accepted her service more easily than it accepted her authority. Camilla answered quietly that she no longer needed financial control to prove her place in his life. The Queen had lost an office, but she had not lost the meaning of what she had endured beside him. Camilla reached for the small household authorization key attached to her personal chain. The object had represented her power to approve official decisions within her office. She removed it slowly and placed it beside Charles's hand. She did not push it toward William in anger. She returned it to the crown she had served. William then made his final promise. The prince confirmed that Camilla's established charitable work would not be erased, and that her staff would receive fair transition support. His words made one truth clear. The reform had not been revenge. It had been a boundary. The monarchy's verdict was final. No rival financial court, hidden reserve, or competing authority would survive into William's reign. Camilla kept her title, her marriage, and a smaller public role. The future king gained control, but also learned that firmness carried a human cost. Charles accepted that protecting tomorrow sometimes meant dismantling part of today. Camilla entered the crisis believing William had severed her final connection to the crown. In truth, he had ended the illusion that her authority could survive unchanged beyond Charles. The monarchy emerged wounded, but united: one sovereign, one crown, and no rival court. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.